right, next in the certification program track, we have Richard Williamson, the principal member of technical staff, Utimaco, to present on the workflow and the WAC implementing on HSM custom firmware.
Right, so a little bit about me. Cryptographers and statisticians know about the the birthday paradox. I've got more street addresses than years that I've been alive, so I've moved often. So it's statistically likely that I lived around the corner from you at one point in my life. So as an HSM vendor, we are going to provide an HSM that does common crypto. Elliptic curve, RSA, AES. We will support the post-quantum algorithms. But it's lowest common denominator crypto. We're not going to support IETF draft stuff. We're not going to support post-quantum algorithms which have not been approved by NIST. And this means that if you need to use those algorithms or you want to investigate those algorithms, and you want to investigate those algorithms running on an HSM, then you are probably going to have to put it on the HSM yourself. So that's what this talk is about. So the benefits there are two benefits to writing custom firmware for your HSMs. These are workflow and WAC. Workflow means that you're going to take a multi-transaction operation and turn it into an atomic call. So instead of going back and forth to the HSM 14 times to do one transaction, you're going to pack all of the inputs into that one call. The HSM is going to work through that workflow, and what you get back is your end result without having to expose any internal keys. If you're driving keys internally, those keys never come out of the HSM. They're used in place and securely zeroized, and things like that. So you benefit. The benefits of workflow are generally in network overhead. You don't have to make all those calls to the HSM, and slightly better security because your drive keys are not exposed. WAC, on the other hand, is when you come to us and you say, I'm using ECVRF, Edwards 25519, SHA 512, Alligator 2. And we look at you and we go, good for you. What is that? And then you research it, you find it, and you find out that it's reasonably easy to do. It's an understood process, and it's an IETF draft. So we're not going to do that for you. It's a question of return on investment for us. But if we can provide to you an SDK that allows you to take that code, put it into the HSM yourself, now you have access to those algorithms, and you also have the IP yourself. We don't see the IP, so you don't have to worry, your lawyers don't have to worry about us exposing your IPs to third party. That last bullet point there where it says as an edge case there might be functionality on HSM that's not exposed to the host. Right now we're in this transition period between classical computational cryptography and post-quantum cryptography. And the HSMs that I sell have had dilithium and kyber on them for years. It's just not exposed. So if you had wanted to use those algorithms, you would have had to write your own custom firmware to act as a bridge between the host and those algorithms. So what are these things? In MBA speak, it's economies of scale and economies of scope. Scale means you're doing more for the same time budget. Scope means that you're doing more with the same equipment. And if you can do both of those at the same time, i.e. you're using custom workflow and you're doing non-standard cryptography, then you're benefiting from economies of scope at scale. And the returns can be immediately seen when you realize that if your HSM is pretty far away topologically from the application that's issuing the commands, you don't have to make all those network hops for the 14 or 15 or 16, pardon me, I wave my hands when I talk. you'll get used to it. But you don't have to worry about all those network hops for all of those commands. You just make the one out and back. So as a real-world use case to talk about, this is the Salesforce Bring Your Own Key methodology. You go to their website, you get a RSA wrapping key, you load the public key into your HSM in order to encrypt your, the key that you're bringing to them, except they want a thumbprint of that key. The HSMs themselves, they don't know how to do that thumbprint the way that Salesforce wants it done. So you're going to have to pull the key bits out of the HSM in the clear in order to do the thumbprint, in order to make your bring your own key valid to Salesforce. In a custom workflow process, you just send their public key and the other additional information into the HSM, and what you get back is the encrypted key and the thumbprint, which you can then pack up and send. So you're saving on network transit hops, but the main problem with this is that that key is exposed in the clear. Even if it's in your application momentarily just to do the digest, it is on your host in the clear. When you're doing this with custom firmware, instead you just send the necessary key identifiers so we can pick the right keys. You send any additional data, so if you're doing some sort of AEAD encryption in your IVs, and what you get back is the final payload. It's like one call, and it's quick. So if you're going to talk to a vendor about, let's say that you want to do this, and you want to write custom firmware for your HSMs. The first thing you need to ask your HSM vendor is, do they support this methodology? Not all HSM vendors allow you to run custom firmware on your on the HSMs that you've purchased. If they do allow it, do they have an SDK that allows you to leverage what's there, or do they put you in a sandbox and force you to do your own stunts? And when you work with them and ask, can you help me with this? You want to know that the engineers there actually use the same process for the actual general availability release software. It's more a question of support. So you have a question on what you're doing. Do the people at the company actually know how to do they understand what it is you're doing, and have they done it themselves, and will they be able to provide an answer? So where will your habits trip you up? That's the, not on this slide. Okay, that was out of order. So the kind of questions that you want to ask to the vendor is professional services available, or is professional services required? One of the HSM vendors does allow you to run custom firmware, but they want to write it for you. And this means that they'll sell it as, yeah, it's easier that way. Well, it's true, but you have to give them your IP for them to get it into the HSM. Is there training available? Are the people who are doing the training actual embedded systems programmers? Do they understand working in that constrained environment? After you've described your goal or your end goal to the vendor, can they give you an idea of how much time it's going to take for you to implement that module? You really need to know that up front before you can decide whether the return on investment of doing the work is going to come back and not actually cover the engineering costs that it took to do it. Does the HSM vendor have a simulator? Because you are going to have to step through your code, and once your code is on the HSM, sometimes it can be very hard to do anything with that because it's an HSM. There's no JTAG ports, which means you can't connect to the device and actually step through the card via the hardware. The main drawback, however, is as soon as you load your custom firmware module onto the HSM, you've invalidated any certificate that HSM has. FIPS goes out the window because now you're running uncertified software. Even if the platform itself carries a FIPS certificate, as soon as you put your third-party module on there, that FIPS certificate is no longer valid. You cannot run that device in FIPS certified mode. It is possible to take those modules back through certification. We have done that. What else? Well, the HSM is an embedded system. It's not Linux. It's probably not Windows. It is going to be a certain engineering mindset to get your code running. It may not be standard CLib based, which means they may not be printf, it may not be malloc and free. And all the skills that you've developed over the years learning to program in C may not exist because of the embedded environment you're working in. And HSMs are security modules. There's no JTAG or anything like that where you can attach a scope and watch what your code is doing. Questions to the vendor. Have we ever taken any third-party modules back through FIPS? We have. How much is it to license the certification evidence? Will the base firmware that we, as the vendor, write, will it need to be modified to work with your module? Generally, the case is yes, because during secure boot, we're looking at what code is going to be loaded and run. And if we see a third-party module, we're going to say no. So we have to teach our code to accept your module. How much of the base firmware does the custom firmware have access to? Are you running inside of a sandbox, or are you running as another peer of that realm? And then you also have questions of certification lab. How much is it going to cost to resub or recert or delta cert to get your own certificate? If you're running as a peer, workflow may be very cheap. If you're running in a sandbox, if the sandbox doesn't give you access to AES and you need AES, you may find yourself implementing AES, in which case the executable lines of codes go way up, and that's where the cost of certification is, the number of executable lines of code. How can we help as the vendor? Well, we probably do have an SDK that can simplify at least the development process. HSM firmware is probably written in C, or at least can consume C objects. While the HSM may or may not support any of the standard lib stuff that you're looking for, there's usually a reason why it's not there, and there's usually a way to do it. For example, allocating memory is difficult inside HSM, not because it's difficult to allocate memory, but because there are two memory banks. There's two heaps. There's the SD RAM, and then there's the secure RAM. And if you're allocating space for a private key, you want that in the secure RAM. Not to say that the other RAM isn't secure, but it's more along the lines of, in the event of an alarm, what happens to secure RAM versus standard RAM. Secure RAM gets actively zeroized, so long as there's power to do that. If there's no power, then the RAM is inactive anyway. So each vendor will have ways to enable debugging, so just make sure you ask the vendor how they do that. So what difficulties are there in the firmware development? You generally will have a way to debug. Maybe it's flashing LEDs. At the other end of the scope, you have, the vendor may have a simulator that you can compile and run your code in. And you can do hardware, software code debugging with the actual HSM part taken by the simulator. How much time do I have? I'm not wearing a watch. So. Anyway, the most frustrating part of the development is that these are remote procedure calls. You do have to serialize the data that you're sending to the HSM, and that's where you're going to spend the most amount of your time. You have to create code that will serialize and deserialize formatted buffers. And you have to do it probably in at least two languages, possibly a third. You need deserializers and serializers in C. You also probably need them in C++ and Java. That is by far where you will spend the most amount of your time, because it's also the hardest thing to figure out when something goes wrong, if your byte buffers are out of order or something. And longer term, what happens when those byte buffers change? You may need to add a field in the future, and how does that affect libraries on the host which were statically linked? And how does it affect your modules when this non-standard byte buffer arrives? So, second real-world use case, we recently end-of-sailed one of our HSMs, and we had a customer who was running custom firmware on there for close to 20 years. And they have to renew their entire module. And after we had looked at what they were doing, there were 48 subfunctions that they were calling. Of those 48 subfunctions, there were 67 interfaces. And just looking at the time to convert that from what they were doing to the new stuff, yeah, I've got former Utimaco people looking at it and trying to figure out who those were. We figured it was going to take probably about 5 months of engineering to actually do that work. So Utimaco has a code generator that using an XML input, we were able to auto-generate almost all of the code. And it took us 12 engineering days instead of 105. So there are going to be ways to accelerate the development. At the end of the day, you know, if you have a question about how to make it easier, you can ask. The code generators also spit out test vectors and can consume XML text vectors and do testing. Let's see, 80% reduction in engineering costs to port their modules. Another type of return on investment is what happens if your data is metered, if your HSM is in the cloud, and your applications are in the cloud, your HSMs are in the cloud, GPHSM as a service, and what's being metered is data that you're sending to the HSM. In this case, if you take this is the same pattern that I had on the earlier slide, where you might be making 20 or 30 calls to the HSM to do one transaction. Maybe you're actually sending the data twice because you need a digest of it, and maybe you're encrypting it or you're signing it. If you can pack all that into a single call to the HSM, you can, even in this simple case, you can reduce the amount of metered traffic by half. So, thanks for your attention. Any questions?
Sweet, I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard. And that's one of the last technical sessions in this certification program track.
Maybe I should have asked these questions. Who's stuck here because your flight can't get out till tomorrow? A couple of you? A couple of you? Who's here because you really want to be here? Oh, thank you. These are friends. These are friends now. Okay. Okay, so we've had a good 3 days, maybe some of you 4. Were any of you PQC day before? Several of you? I missed that. Was a productive day? Good. So I think every year we face new challenges, we get new requirements, new fun, and then we try to go back to our respective locations and try to figure out what to do. And so Aaron and I were talking, and they gave us the toughest thing to address here in closing, right? It needs to be fun and something to just uplifting, and you leave home and you're happy. But so I'm between you and your going back to your respective locations. So those of you who don't know, I'm Shawn Geddis. Those of you who may know me, you probably remember me from being part of Apple for 25 years. I left there, and I part of Katalyst now, doing some other work, actually tooling to help everyone to get their job done. But today, for this panel, I've acquired a few esteemed colleagues to sit here as I think a fireside chat, guys, to talk about solving our future problem, but we were having fun here off to the side. So the title of our discussion here is supposed to be International Cryptographic Module Validation Recognition Arrangement. We're all familiar with recognition arrangements, like CCRA kind of style. Is it possible, and what would it look like, or what would it need? So that's the impossible challenge we have to solve in the next hour. So first of all, thank you for still being here, and I will give you a quick idea who's with us, and I will have them each give a little bit of bio on themselves. I know that many of you probably have heard them all speaking at different sessions last couple days. But first of all, we have Manish Upasani, actually Global Head of Product at Utimaco. Then we have Graham Costa, Security and Certifications Manager at Thales. Then we have David Hook, VP Software Engineer, Legion of Bouncy Castle, Keyfactor. And then we have Victor Mateu, Acting Chief Researcher at TI. So the five of us, mainly the four, but the five of us will try to address this daunting question we have now put in front of us by Aaron. So first of all, again, international cryptographic module validation recognition arrangement, is it possible? So first of all, let's rehash a little bit about kind of where we are and the status of that. But let's go down the line. Start here with you, Manish. Give a little bit of who you are, what you do, and kind of where you're fit in the product's life cycle, I think is the important thing. And that's how we want to talk about this going forward, just so that everyone has a chance of figuring out where our perspectives are coming from. So start with Manish. Wait a minute. Microphones? The back? Microphones? Or do we have to turn them on?
No, I don't know. Oh,
There
okay.
you go.
That's okay. Manish Upasani, I'm the head of products at Utimaco. Utimaco is known for their hardware security modules. So we have general purpose HSMs, we have payment HSMs, we have key management solutions. So everything all put together, and I come in from the product side. So I have to look at it from a business perspective. Getting certified is certainly a need for my products, but at the same time, what it yields in terms of the business. Do I have to get certified against everything out there? Maybe I do if I have to do business in that region. But at the same time, what is the business potential of that? And if we have a common benchmarking or a common certification for that matter, that certainly helps me because then I don't have to keep chasing one certification after another instead of concentrating on the core capabilities of my product. And that's the perspective that I'm bringing on the table.
Hello, so Graham Costa. I'm actually covering for my boss, Laurie Mack, who was meant to be here, but unfortunately is sick. I have 20 years working in certifications across both government certifications through to FIPS, through to Common Criteria, PCI HSM, and many, many regional certifications. I'm a vendor, very similar to the gentleman next door to me. I work for Thales. Thales has products where we have cryptographic modules that do everything from going to space, to being HSMs, to network encryptors, to smart cards, eSIMs, secure elements. And we need to deal, and the team I work in, day to day with certification requirements globally. So from the perspective of the vision, the dream, yes, it would be nice to have single points of certification that we can get that cover multiple markets. But I think as part of this panel, I'm more the kind of doer Scottish person who's a bit more realistic and where I, practically see through, I guess you should say, I work on the ground with regards to getting the certification. So my day-to-day job is engaging with the certification authorities, presenting the evidence, having the discussions, trying to work out actually what we need to do to get through certification. And in some cases, really, why are we doing the certification? Or from dealing with foreign certification authorities, what are you really trying to get at or want? And a lot of the time, what certifications are about is not necessarily security, and that kind of plays into this part and this game. And I think some of the things that we're going to discuss as part of the product. So, what is the security certification really about? And is that a barrier to the bigger dream of having a kind of certify once and sell worldwide?
David?
Yeah, so David Hook, working for Keyfactor. I'm primarily responsible for the care and feeding of the Bouncy Castle APIs. And I was responsible for their initial FIPS certification. I'm still doing that today. But I've also been on the side of a few common criteria certifications built on that FIPS certification. It's definitely from us, we're approaching, well, for me, I guess I'm here as a vendor, but largely because my users basically build further certifications, usually on top of our APIs, certified products. So I know in my case, going through the trauma of the FIPS queue, there's then other people have to go through the trauma of other queues in other places. So I guess, one thing, of course, is, if there was an international arrangement of some sort, it'd obviously be a lot easier for them to do that because at least some of the work would be done up front. The other thing, too, that's important is, I'm clearly Australian. The accent is not put on. The important thing to remember with international arrangements, of course, is if you're going to try and do these, there'll always be someone on the panel who's either jet-lagged or up at the middle of the night. So I'm representing that. Yes.
And Victor?
I'm also representing the same. So I'm Victor Mateu. I come from TII, which is a semi-public or semi-private, I don't know which is the right name nowadays, institution. And basically what we are doing, I would say it's the other end from my colleagues here. So we have participation with public entities that they want to, let's say, advise on how to regulate, how to do the whole proposition to have secure assets into the UAE. And then we also do assessment for private companies, which are asking us, okay, what is the right process? How can we come up with a validation? Should we have a validation in the UAE? And all these questions, so that we try to come up with solutions that actually avoid having a regulation that has its own certification. And I think maybe my point of view is like on the other side of what you're facing. But just to be clear, I try to help you, okay?
Perfect.
Okay, so as we were chatting earlier, our impossible question here is it possible to have some kind of a dare I say, global recognition? So let's start by going back to the beginning. What's the problem we're trying to solve? So let's start by asking each one of you, how many different crypto validations do you all have to face on your products? Different, meaning it's not just one, maybe it's one. How many different validations do you do on products?
So we have products in all the different areas and selling in different countries, and that's something that makes it more difficult. Yeah. We have things obviously here in the US where we have to certify against FIPS, and then FIPS, the story around it, 140-2 and then 140-3. We have products that we sell in Germany. We have products that sell in Korea, in Japan, and so all within these four, there are like multiple certifications. We have then on the other side of the house, we have payments, and then that's where we go to PCI and yada yada. So I don't know, maybe more than 15, 20-ish certifications that we have to do, and that makes it a little bit difficult because I'm chasing certifications all the time. Once I'm done with one, I'm getting to the next, and then next, and then next. Where does it stop? There is no end to it.
Okay. Others? How many guys?
Others? So we don't have enough time, so I'm just going to go with everything that Utimaco said. Plus, we have modules that go to space, so you got space regulation stuff. And yeah, lots more. So it's a difficult space. Sometimes it's a cost of business, but yeah, it is what it is. It would be lovely if there was a solution, but every market's going to have its controllers, and everyone's going to have a different view on what the requirements should be.
So, I mean, in that case, we haven't got anything in space. I think, actually, no, I believe we do. Sorry. I was going to say we do have a module running on a tram somewhere in Rotterdam, because I have photographic evidence of that. Yeah, we've normally got 2 to 3 certifications on the go at once now, in order to keep up with both the maintenance requirements of the modules and also the fact that, the standards are always being tweaked. Probably for us, where it gets more exciting is when we actually finish our certification and then all our user base starts doing their own certifications on top of it, either rebrands or actual real certifications, where they combine some additional software, or they go on and do something like common criteria, or they want to take the FIPS certification and go to some other country and then try and get it certified under their regime as well.
Just quickly, I forgot to say, but I think the maintenance side of things is really important. And for all the certificates you get, you need to maintain them, and if your products are valid for 5-10 years, then you don't get a certificate and it goes away. It's something you need to maintain, and pretty much all the certifications are like that as well. So
if I can highlight, Dave, you out of the panel members here, you're the one that has a lot more customers relying and waiting for you to get your product validated. Other ones have products. I think they're waiting for you because they need to repackage your product.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, so that's another layer on top of that. So Just wanted to highlight that.
From my side, I think we have been involved only in 2 certifications, I think, and it's not my company, so basically it's the assessment and the process. So we try to avoid that
Right.
as much as possible.
And so the reason I was asking that question, of course, is the fact that we all think about one of the biggest challenges for our products is that we have to keep revalidating in a new region under new scrutiny or different regulations. I think we've all faced that, where if you change for one, that might be a challenge in another. So even think of some of the algorithms. You know, some countries want subset A of algorithms, and another country wants a different set, or maybe even in fact wants to ensure that an algorithm that's allowed in another country is not used in your product. How do you go about handling that kind of challenge in dealing with the Venn diagram, if you will, of the algorithm sets that are available in your products across the disparate environments?
Well, I don't think there is a solution right now to it. Right now, it's like version 1.0 certified against NIST or FIPS for that matter, and then version 2, because by the time I'm ready for the second certification, adding all of those things, my product life cycle has moved on. I have come up with the newer releases, and now I get that version certified against something else. And then yet another one, there is a different certification for that guy. So there is no one common denominator that we are able to find that, okay, this is the version and I will get this certified against all the 15 different certifications. There is no solution to that.
Okay.
I think, I mean, I can think of smart cards and HSMs. I mean, there is a mantra, you know, to make these things configurable, and that's really like cryptogility and configuration. It has complexity, but it's kind of a necessary evil as far as being able to deal with different certification requirements in different places, and in particular with crypto. So basically making sure that for different algorithms that there are ways to turn them on or off, and to do that in a secure way. And if that's not good enough for you, then you're probably not going to be one of our customers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in our case, we largely follow, well, certainly for the certified stuff, we largely follow the FIPS regime. So, you know, you go into approved mode and it will stop doing some things. I mean, I guess one of the interesting aspects of that, of course, is there's always customer confusion about the fact that some things are listed in the security policy, say MD5 up until recently, due to the fact it was used in TLS, as not to be used for anything else but otherwise available for that purpose. And other people who think that MD5, I can run the code and it uses MD5 and suddenly it's all great. Or triple DES, for example, the transition for that ended at the end of last year. I had an email from someone who's complaining that they were upgrading to the new FIPS module and triple DES encryption was no longer working because they were still using it. And I said, well, look, I'm just going to pretend you never said this to me, but you might find this document really, really useful. So yeah, there's definitely confusion around algorithms. How you'd address that in a sort of, I guess, global way, I think clearly any arrangement like that would have to be probably algorithm agnostic, or at least the infrastructure required to support algorithm testing under a regime like that would have to allow people to select their own algorithm sets. You know. Yeah.
Yeah, so from our side, I would say that one of the advantages that we have in the UAE is that all this very regulated framework, it's not existent there. So basically what we are trying to push for is this international solution to be applied. So if someone has a FIPS certification, just deal with what is the requirement of the functionality. Usually, majority of the times, our clients, what they expect is something that is cryptographically robust. So can I attest that something with FIPS certification is robust? In my opinion, usually like 95% of the times, I would say it is as good as what I can come up for the country. So there is no need to come and you know, reconstruct the wheel just to show that it runs. So the main purpose of us is to enhance this security. If we have to come up with a different process all the time, it's going to be very hard for key players to enter into the country and start being able to leverage technology into the different areas where everyone in the country can be benefiting from. So that's kind of my takeaway from the process. Is the whole process should be more unified, at least from the countries, that are expecting to receive the technology. I understand a lot of control to export the technology. But if you actually want it in your country, I think you should be able, as a country, to accommodate for different kind of regulations. So you want to do common criteria, okay, do common criteria. You want to do FIPS certification, accept them. Have someone who can actually go through them. Actually, as he was mentioning, maybe you can say, okay, I don't want this to be supported because maybe my vendor will stop, let's say, being responsive after a certain time. So I don't want to have something that I cannot update. Maybe you can cut up on things that you know they are going to be deprecated eventually. But essentially, the main purpose would be to have one way to accommodate for whatever this asset has been already validated for.
Yeah, I mean, there is a famous understanding that's like, do you want to be secure or you want to be compliant? End of the day, compliance becomes that checklist item that, okay, are you FIPS certified? Yes. Are you operating in the FIPS certified mode? Maybe the answer to that question is a no. It ends up becoming a checklist item.
Yeah. So we kind of know the general challenge. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to add one thing, that in the crypto world, configuration stuff is great, but secure by default is a term that's increasingly used, creates some headaches in that world, and that fair enough, you can turn stuff on and off, but how you decide what is secure by default and therefore should be your default what's on. And that kind of almost with it brings the same challenges as to, secure by default, but everyone's view of what's secure is different, and secure by default just creates the same problem with regards to algorithms and what should be enabled and what should be disabled, and many bun fights over that.
Right. So our challenge is we'd love for things to be easier. We do it once. We do understand that there's different incentives, right, in different areas of the world. Different incentives of having other algorithms, or there may be more confidence in some over others. And so that causes that rift that we're talking about. It causes the little nuance of, yes, I want this, or I don't want that. So as we're kind of thinking about how we would, pie in the sky, how we would try to address some of this kind of stuff, what's some of the low-hanging fruit, or how would we get to some form of unification, or some form of at least, as folks would say, put all the wood behind the arrow, put it all in one direction. Is there some common denominator that we could look to as being whether it's methodology or whether it's something that we can all share to get there faster? Or is this a bit of a challenge? Well, let's start on the other end. We'll keep swapping. Let's start with Victor.
Let's do that.
Yeah, if you ask me, I think we are trying to round the square. We are trying to make something kind of impossible here, because there is like the motivation towards having this accreditation is usually different per each place. So the reason why I don't want to have one in the country, it's because it basically narrows you down to one direction, and it doesn't allow key players to be coming. So if you want to do something international, I think it will start by actually removing the national entities for this, so that no one can claim ownership and can claim to be driving it. I know that there are plenty of entities that are happy to collaborate, but let's say the geopolitical situation actually doesn't allow this to happen. So for that purpose, I think we are trying to do something that I find it hard that it comes to fruition, though it's a very nice idea.
It's good. Okay, good.
I think there's probably somewhere you could start. I mean, one of the funny things about the situation we're currently in is that both FIPS and Common Criteria, of course, are ISO standards. Both different ones, of course, that should be a warning in itself. But yeah, if you look at the ACVP, for example, they've been publishing those algorithm testing plans as ITF documents. We're in the process of doing that. So I think there is actually, an area of bandwidth where we could actually introduce these things as international standards that could be widely used. Then it'd be a question of whether you could get different countries to sign up to use them in a similar way.
guess my main point was going to be standards. That's, if you can agree standards and if you can do it through the higher order standards organizations, then that helps a lot to break down some barriers. But I'm still in a world where that doesn't necessarily work. I mean, it gets you to the point where at least you can have a product which is functionally compliant with different validation authorities' requirements, but that doesn't get rid of the general control aspect associated with some security certifications. I guess some positives, I mean, if this was 10 years ago, looking back in the payment space before PCI HSM was around, there was a whole host of payments like regional card brands, payment certifications that we used to have to do for the payments HSMs, be it APN or GBIC or whatever the one in France is, MEPS, that's now called Sapphire. I mean, PCI HSM has really catalyzed that world where, although there are still, for various reasons, kind of regional adaptions, there's still this kind of like idea of a standard that's good for all, and we see less little local, you need to go and do a payment certification for Bulgaria or Austria. A lot of them will just go with, it's out there, we just standardize on this. Similar thing happens for things like EIDAS and requirements there. So you do have certain countries that follow the kind of central standards, and then a load of them over time, although they used to have regional standards, will kind of go with the flow. So I think standards is good at leading people, and eventually countries or organizations and institutes need to make a decision and say, well, do we continue to invest the cost in whatever we think we're doing with the certification, or can we actually get to consuming things? And price and time and availability of product kind of does eat into that. On the ISO stuff, I mean, there's some things that are just never going to work. So even though we've got 19790, we've got multiple schemes. I mean, I guess there's good and bad stories there. I mean, the three schemes that used to use 19790 were JCMVP in Japan, KCMVP in Korea, and CMVP. JCMVP recently kind of gave up. I mean, the long time there was a thing where it was like, well, you need to do JCMVP unless there's no certified product, and therefore, if that's the situation, you can use a FIP certified product. So clever vendors kind of went, well, we're just never going to certify in JCMVP because that's just going to create a problem. And no local vendors took up the challenge, and so you could reuse your FIP certification in that market. There's other markets, however, say KCMVP, where there's very different reasons as to why that certification exists, and whether the requirements are identical, whether they're both based on 19790, I don't think you're ever going to get KCMVP to agree to just consume straight off FIP certified product for lots of different reasons. So standards are important, and it does help to avoid situations where we just fundamentally can't meet the different certification requirements for different markets. But also it kind of helps. It helps sort things out over time when time and money come into play longer term.
I think I agree with that. Another thing is accepting that we have a problem. Unless we accept that there is a problem, we won't be able to find the solution to it. So now that we accept that there is a problem, it's a good idea to find that solution, number one. Number two is when we create such a program, it is also important to have inputs from the other standards, like, for example, KCMVP that was mentioned, or the Japan one. We need to have input from them, or the various countries. If we create a common pot, then we need to get inputs coming in from the various regions into that, so that this common pot or whatever standards caters to all of those different countries and their own requirements. And that's kind of vital. Number two is the CAVP itself. The algorithms are going to be algorithms. It doesn't matter where it is. It's maths. And you're not going to get a different answer just because you test it on a different server or through a different specification. So the acceptance of those algorithms being tested and validated is another low-hanging fruit, in my opinion.
There's one extra.
Oh, go ahead.
I think, to help things out, I think just agreeing, if you could agree kind of like similar to what's happened in the IoT world, a set of core requirements, that really helps with trying to avoid conflict between different certification schemes. And there's some things going on at the moment and some evolving requirements, say, for example, the EU CCRA, where that body of people have fundamental requirements about things like vulnerability management and ability to patch. And there's always going to be a fundamental conflict with trying to get mutual recognition with other schemes that don't address those things. And so I think where we have schemes that we think that could be compatible with each other, or organizations that control markets that should be compatible with each other, I think kind of getting this common sense agreement on fundamental requirements for security is a real enabler to kind of opening doors in the future.
So actually, that's a good lead into a comment I was going to make before, and that is that for those of you who are not aware, within the common criteria side, there's a CC crypto working group that worked very closely together for quite some time. So we were, some of us were working on the outskirts of that or benefited from the work, but they created themselves really a catalog of crypto, right? Crypto requirements and dependencies and things like that. So they developed an agreement across those countries to really establish a catalog of cryptography. It wasn't to agree what is required or is not, but really more of a catalog or a superset. And from that, all of the protection profiles, collaborative protection profiles, you name it, were all drawing from those, because now they have a kind of a standard uniform way of communicating what those requirements were, right? Because sometimes we all put in wording differently what we mean, and so then there's a little bit of conflict in the interpretation. And so I think the benefit of that was universally identifying how to uniquely identify each one of those algorithms, but put it together as one big catalog across the board. And so that's been very valuable. So since we talked about this fact that everyone really has their own incentive, different things, is there a way, since common criteria, so just about everyone in this room, I would believe, you're doing both FIPS, crypto algorithm testing, and you're doing common criteria together, right? You're kind of doing it all. So you'd like to reuse, you'd like to get multiple wins for one effort. Is doing kind of a uniform methodology for doing that testing, is that something of value? So for instance, I throw out to all of you, is it potential to, in some form, reuse the good work that's going on with the ACVP to do simple algorithm testing, right? That we all know cryptography is basically math, right? You're testing the math of the algorithms. Is that one thing, some kind of low-hanging fruit, that could be from a methodology, from a protocol, since the protocol itself is looking to be standardized? Is that something that we could potentially see as a low-hanging fruit win across the board without enforcing or inflicting pain of you have a limited set of algorithms? It's now you validate what you need in that area, but it's a standardized way of doing it. So let me start with Graham and go that way, and we'll come back.
Sure.
I'm just trying to shake it up a little bit. So.
I was looking forward to saying whatever Utimaco says. So I think as far as it goes, it makes sense that if you trust people to develop algorithms, then from a functional compliance perspective, you should trust them to provide tools to be able to validate the correctness of those algorithms. So all the work that's gone into the NIST standards from international collaboration, we've got ACVP, we've got open source implementations of the algorithms and the things that are on GitHub. It really makes sense that if you trust in this to define the algorithms and the people that collaborated with them and that they haven't done sneaky things to influence them, then you should trust them to do the reference implementation or to collaborate with their collaborators to have a reference implementation. It frustrates me to see things like, if you've got a specific country that goes off and they're like, oh, we do ACVTS and we're going to use the protocol, but we've got our own implementations of the algorithms and you need to test them with us. And it's like, well, what's the point? So as far as it goes, completely agree with that. Is like, if the people that define and standardize the algorithms, if there are organizations that can also stand up reference implementations and testing for that as far as functional compliance goes, I think, yeah, for sure, that's something that should be reused. Where I think it gets complicated is that I think you then won't get agreement depending on the industry and vertical as to whether that's enough to validate the crypto. And we end up in the whole world of side channels. And in the world of side channels, then you've got 101 different opinions as to how do you validate side channels. Do you go down the European CC route where you need to be a real subject matter expert and things get really looked at in depth? Or do you take the kind of broad brush approach, which is, as represented in 17825, and TVLA and where FIPS probably may one day get to, where you're just really looking at it and saying, you know, with a limited budget, a limited timescale, is there anything really obvious that says there's leakage? But, you know, for any implementation that has any countermeasures, whether they're implemented correctly or not, you're probably not going to see anything. So I think when you get to that bit, that's still really contentious, and it all comes down to what people's threat profiles are as to what they consider acceptable and how much effort they feel need to go into things. And that ties back to verticals and markets and really what can go wrong if the crypto can leak. And that's different for payments cards, it's different for passports, probably different for eSIMs. You know, you're not going to get agreement on that, and different verticals are going to take different views.
David.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, kind of. I sort of half agree. Yeah, I'd definitely say that it's not going to be the case that you can do everything. So if there was going to be some sort of international standard for dealing with these things, obviously everybody's going to want to add their own special bit on top, which is fine. I think for us the main thing would be, you know, if it happened once, then all our users could actually go, well, this bit's already done. So I think that in itself would be useful. One of the interesting things with the ACVP, of course, it's a protocol in its own right. So if you get everyone to sign on to that protocol, not only do you get your algorithm testing, but as we're seeing now with the automation of security policy generation, it also gives you a mechanism for accurately specifying the capabilities and properties of the algorithms that you're testing as well. So, you know, there's additional things that you can actually get out of having a protocol that's based on JSON that you're then using as the source of your algorithm testing. So I think ACVP could actually be driven a bit further than it is. Yeah, after that, you know, the fact if you could have international servers, so multiple places all providing algorithm testing for the same or different algorithms, that would also actually lend a lot of credence to the process as well. The other thing too, which Graham brought up, was just the issue of, we've mainly talked about our algorithms, but there's also this issue of actually testing protocols. I think that's probably something we need to explore further in terms of compliance.
To be honest, I kind of disagree with the point that he raised before about NIST providing the verification path, because we need to trust the one that provides the algorithms to be able to provide the way to test them. I kind of like the other way around, like you propose something and someone else challenges. So I wouldn't allow someone to provide me the solution and the way to verify it, because if there is a mistake that was done, certainly the verification process wouldn't capture it, because the design was not covering for that. Otherwise, they wouldn't put it. So in my opinion, the way to go, especially if we are targeting something like collaborative between multiple entities, is that one proposes and the others validate, so that the one who is proposing it will never be able to push for something or make the mistake. I mean, we understand that avoiding all ill intention or bad faith, I would say it is only reasonable that I will not be able to validate something that I didn't capture in my own design. While if someone else has the idea that you are going to have it, most likely they are going to try to push for these corner cases that might trigger this to happen. And the other part that I find it hard, and it's not something that we mentioned here, is that if we are targeting a low-hanging fruit, in the end, what we are going to get will be like a certification that even if I accept the idea of incremental certifications, where you have something and then you build on top of that so that it can be having like different ramifications, what I would suspect is that the one that is the smallest subset of all of them, in the end, this certification serves a purpose for a client that needs it in order to guarantee the security in front of someone, or governments, or other clients itself. If the small is so small, if the subset is so small, who would care about this certification? Who would enforce this certification? Like, who will be the client that will say, I want this check on my product, because otherwise I don't trust it? And if I don't have a client that believes that this certification makes a purpose, who of you will implement it? Absolutely no one. Mm-hmm. So that's my conceptual problem with the impossibility I was taking before. It's like, it's like we are trying to do something that goes kind of against of the nature of what we are trying to do, right? Which is build confidence on the process. That's my sad take on this.
So round us out here, Manish.
No, I think what was supposed to be said on the topic is said. Only one thing that I would add there is, if there is one thing that we learned about computers is to avoid repetition. Here we are repeating it for every single certification. If we can avoid that, there is nothing better than that.
Okay. So we, oh, go ahead, Graham.
Just on the server and this side of things, I think the transparency part of it is really important, and I think that the fact that the code and the server and those side of things are public leads it kind of gets away a little bit from it being closed. They can make mistakes. That stuff can go through public scrutiny. There is another side of the fence in that, you know, you really don't want people to use those algorithms if they're not correctly implemented, et cetera, et cetera. But it does mean that if it's done in that way, then I still have the opinion that the people that design the algorithms with contributions from the international community could still maybe air-gapped, but, you know, have a separate team that is also steps up the services for validating functional conformance against them, provided it's transparent.
Yeah, transparency is an important thing for sure.
Okay. So one, before I get close to the end here, but one other thing that I always challenge myself is, what's the first word in our conference? International. How many different schemes or how many different entities did we talk about?
2.
Maybe 2. I kind of throw this out. Is that just natural, or are we overclaiming that we cover the world and we aren't really covering the world and we're only representing a small piece? I mean, we claim as a group that we're an international crypto module conference, right? Are we really addressing an international problem, or are we just claiming it? I throw that out to you. That's a personal question for me, because I guess I've been part of this from the very beginning as well. And I have always wanted and really enjoyed more international involvement from other governments, other vendors, other labs from around the world. Do we have enough engagement in that to claim that we are an international group? I throw that out to anyone jump in on that one.
Well, if we are strict about the wording, two countries would be enough, right? To be international, so maybe that's the case. Certainly, I think even from the panel itself, when Utimaco and Thales were basically mentioning the several paths that they have to undergo in the different countries, I would say it's obvious that these countries and these processes are not represented here. So it is international in a smaller scale. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe they are not interested in it. I mean, no one says that they are not invited, right? But I totally agree. I think it is strictly international, but not a whole world thing, or not even, 25% of the world representative.
Okay.
Well,
anybody else?
Except,
I guess this is the country that hosts World Series baseball. But all I'd say is, I mean, I can kind of understand that probably the international is the 2 countries, Canada and the US, but yeah, I think it would be better if there was more input from other standards bodies in conferences like this, because there's always a risk, a real risk, I think, with any process that you'll miss things, either things that will make life easier for you that you've ignored because you've always done a particular thing the same way, or things that might actually lend to the security of the process as well. So, you know, a bit of diversity, I think, is always a very good idea.
I think, I think there's definitely a case to question whether the title of this conference is appropriate, but it works, and it's established. I think for sure that, you know, although there is representation from a number of different certifications, and, you know, we've seen in the past PCI tracks. There was representation. I mean, there's people here talking about common criteria. There was people talking about CESIP. There was people talking about, I'm sure there's people talking about other certifications as well, but there's definitely an international community involved. And a lot of the companies that are involved are international. I mean, for sure. I mean, it attracts international people. So, you know, all the vendors that are here are not selling products just into this particular market and linked to the certification. So there's an international representation on that perspective.
Okay.
And there's definitely internationally focused discussions happen. But yeah, this particular problem about can we get people around the table and get them to agree more commonality, maybe that's something that can take on, but you know, this is a good seed conference to kind of build into the future.
Good.
As long as there is an acceptance of the standards,
Okay.
it should work.
It should work. Okay. So I think this brings me to my final question. I think this came out in some of our discussion offline early on is, are we trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist or a problem that we can't fix? Are we overthinking it, right? As engineers, right, all engineers in this room, can't you come up with all kinds of ways of creating something that has no meaning whatsoever, but it can be validated, right, because you engineered it, but is it really pay off? So I guess I'm asking ourselves here, is the problem we're trying to solve here, is this really something that we need to solve, or is this we're realizing that it's inherently part of the work we do, and we just have to live with it and kind of go on and do the best?
So far, we have accepted the problem.
Okay, so far.
So far, we have accepted the problem because there is no solution to it. As long as we accept that there is a problem, we are engineers and we solve the problems. That's what we are known for, so we should solve it.
Okay.
So it is a problem.
I'm going for, I'm not trying to solve the problem. I think we can look at, you know, we can look at things at the end of the day. The only reason this problem exists is because people do certifications. If none of the vendors did certifications, this problem would not exist.
True.
So, you know, for me...
Self-inflicted, I think is what you're saying.
Self-inflicted.
Self-inflicted.
It's, you know, the only reason we get involved in, you know, do we have to do KC MVP is because like one vendor in Korea decided to do KC MVP. Otherwise, ultimately it ends up being governments and organizations need technology, you know, and you need secure technology. And really, certifications are not adding security. You know, as a vendor, I do not see security being added because of certifications. They do sometimes establish a low bar and give us reasons that, you know, David's got lots of stories about rivers burning and other things that, you know, certifications do serve some kind of purpose to make sure that anarchy doesn't rule and market forces and capitalism and all the rest of it don't ruin the world. But yeah, I think if you ignore them, I kind of hope that if you ignore them, then they go away. And I think you do kind of see that, you know, I mean, I've been ignoring various certifications in various countries, and as long as we don't bite and say, yeah, we'll get involved in this discussion about spending loads of time with our really technically best resource to help you understand how a device works, then, well, and I'm sure Shawn from his previous life has many stories about this, that if you just say no, then people want your product, people buy your product, and they find ways. So to an extent, I'm ignoring the problem, kind of hoping it will go away, and it does for a large part of the world. So although there are many certifications, you know, there's hundreds and hundreds of countries in the world, I'm not doing hundreds and hundreds of country certifications, and I don't get asked questions by most of them. It's only little markets that have decided for various reasons that they want to do something, control their market. They have a problem, like, you know, IoT, there is a problem, you know, they want to raise the bar. This is where certifications appear, and you know, sometimes if we could just do good security, then, you know, if IoT was doing its thing and considering security, then the EU wouldn't be rolling out all sorts of regulations to force us to do various things to raise the bar. So I'm hoping that you can ignore it and it can go away. I'm definitely not trying to solve the problem.
So we need to put some blinders on.
I'm all for standards.
Put some blinders
on. Yeah, so I think Graham's definitely right. And in part, it's a trade issue as much as anything else when you go across boundaries. I mean, the reality is if you mix politics with engineering, you'll basically get politics. Having said that, like, we see other people go on and build certifications on our modules and often provide them with the assistance they need to, you know, sort of fill in the gaps because we obviously understand the code base better than anyone else. And yeah, we do see people doing the same thing again and again. So I think there's definitely room for us to pull some of the commonality, and I mean the ACVP I think is a good example of that, and being able to document the properties of the actual algorithms that are provided and possibly a protocol testing would be something else I'd be interested in. I think there is a room if you could actually get organisations on a trade basis, countries to agree on a trade basis. It's challenging, I definitely admit. That would actually be worthwhile because it would save a lot of effort.
Yeah, my take on this is, I think certainly there is a problem. I think everyone agrees here that there is a problem, even highlighting the fact that having the certification actually doesn't make much of a service in terms of security in the end, which is the main purpose of it. But I don't know if there is a path towards, when you are talking about studying and having different accredited diploma from different countries, there comes a path in which you can move one thing from one country to another. And I don't see why there cannot be a path towards, okay, let's say I have a legislation on one place and I have a specific certification for my clients. There should be a path that explains what to do to go from one certification to the other so that all the path it's kind of made automated. So the same one that has let's say I have common criteria and I have a module that comes from FIPS. There should be a path, an automated path that allows the certification from one side to encompass a certification because as you mentioned, there are lots of similarities. There are lots of things that can be reused. Why not design a portability framework in which one of them has a path to become another one for specific countries? Like countries might have a reduced amount or an increased. All of these should be built on top of the other part and have a portability path towards having it so that people doesn't need to spend 3 years in getting it from one place and then 3 years for another. Or in your case, you have a product that already integrates it. Why do I need 3 more years when I'm just integrating something else? I think one thing is trying to tackle all of them together, but another thing is trying to understand that they coexist and build bridges between them. I think that is something that I don't see why not. And when you talk with clients independently, a client might say, I want this certification or I want this other certification. But once he's really interested, you will find a path to go from one to the other. So actually nowadays clients are having to do this. And I think the same one that proposes the certification, as part of the research done before, it's understanding the others. Otherwise, why would you propose a new one? And if there is a gap, there needs to be a bridge on how to reach from one to the other. This is something that it's always fascinating me, how they are so isolated in this international context.
So I didn't give you all much advanced notice, but if there were also other questions from folks, I know we only have a few minutes left, but before I was kind of closing some stuff, I wanted to give folks an opportunity if they did have. Does anyone? I don't want to put you on the spot if you do, but Aaron, you go ahead.
I'm not going to pose a question, but as the guy who gave you the impossible question to address, I'd just like to say to everybody in this room, those of you who, when you leave here and go home, are not going home to someplace in the US or Canada, try talking to your regulatory agencies for crypto and cajole them or embarrass them into, maybe you should attend this international conference, as Graham mentioned, that, there's good things here. Come and share your views and that sort of thing, and perhaps it'll help us get to a place where at least maybe we could reuse some things and improve the situation.
Okay. Did anyone else? If not, sorry, go ahead, please. They'll get it. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe following a common criteria model would be a start in solving this problem that we might have? Sure.
Yeah, restate that for everyone so they can hear.
So we've discussed this issue as a problem that is potentially unsolvable in our industry. However, the question itself even seems to reflect the common criteria approach of international recognition, and common criteria seems to have some approaches in solving this issue. Do you feel like following a common criteria sort of model would at least be a start to our solution?
So I have to ask the question, how many different recognition arrangements are there based on common criteria?
I wish I only knew.
Well, there's, it seems like every couple of years we throw one out and start a new one, right? So there's the EUCC now. We still have CCRA, right, John? It still exists. But you have, I guess SOJA still exists, right? But is that got thrown out by the way of EUCC? So I think from a framework, from a methodology, we do have that kind of approach. And in fact, those who attended Margaret Salter's, anybody attend? Because Margaret brought that up. And so she said, why don't we just create a protection profile for crypto and we solve the problem, or at least that's a way to do it. And so I have to put in a spot. Where's Brian? Raise your hand, Brian. Where are you? Okay, Brian. So Brian's now leading out on DSC. And so DSC, I would say, is probably the closest, right? Because that was part of the core requirement on that. It is heavily leveraging the crypto primitives, and even to the point of relying heavily and incorporating the crypto working groups efforts into it. And it was the first CPP, I think, that really took in a lot of those requirements, a lot of the catalog into it. It's still the only one. Okay. So short answer to your question is I think some of us in the community were trying to do some of that. And the closest one I would say would be the dedicated security components, DSC, that is a common criteria collaborative protection profile for hardware key store, relying heavily on cryptography. Now, that doesn't say it meets all these things, and this doesn't solve all the problems. But I think, at least from your comment on the fact that it was solved under common criteria, I somewhat cringe, because many of us, I think, will say under our breath, how much commonality is there in common criteria? So I think we all throw spears at ourselves every time we talk about some of that stuff. But it is an approach, and so I think that's a good reference. So I'm not speaking ill of it. I'm just highlighting some of our ongoing challenges, because sometimes I think we back ourselves into a corner because we. Well, one of the points I wanted to make, and this kind of emphasizes that too, is that we tried to solve this impossible question of is there something we can do to bring it together? When I think most of what you heard here is, are we really trying to force something that may not be naturally there, right? It may seem like we want to improve things and get everyone on the same ship, but if that was true, every government in the world, everyone would agree. And I don't think we can even get, right, John, we talked about this, I don't even think we can get all the US government folks to agree. So if we can't do that, how do we get all these other governments to come to one base? And I think in a way, that's a good thing, right? That's what differentiates us. We all have different motives, we all have different focus, different areas that are maybe more important. And so as long as the framework can give us some improvement without forcing everyone into the same little box, I think we're good. So I think what we were talking offline a little bit before is having a little fun with this, but it may just be that we are taking the engineering approach and trying to solve something that maybe we don't really need to solve at this time. Maybe we can't really, there's a lot of other things we can fix first. We'd love this, and we've all talked about how great it would be that everyone joined in on the same page, but that would then force us all on the same page, right? And I think the flexibility allows us some very good alternatives so that we're not forced to all think the same way and say the same thing and do it the exact same way, because then why would we all need to be here, right? We all have different approaches. So I think that's the conclusion we came to. So hopefully this was helpful. It gave you a little bit of a different approach than the discussion that we had throughout the last couple days. So again, I hope this was good, and I think I need to turn things over to Bill, because he's going to tell you about the future. He's got his magic ball.
Great, thanks. So I wanted to quickly just close things up here. It won't take more than a minute. I wanted to thank first our program committee. We've got a great program committee. They're listed in the show guide. I can't name them all, but I especially want to thank Aaron, who's a... Give him a round of applause. We've got 3 great staff here on site, Nikki, Sophie, and Kevin. I think you've all interacted with them, and they do a great job. So I want to thank them for doing that work. And then the program committee had a difficult job planning for next year. And as everybody knows, who's been here for more than 4 or 5 years, this was a springtime event from the beginning, almost from the beginning. And when COVID hit, things got shifted around. We wound up in the fall. We did that a couple of years, but we're going back to the spring to avoid some important conflicts. So it's 6 months away. What do we do? We've decided to make this a very special edition of ICMC, and there's a lot happening now that sort of supports this. So I just wanted to talk about a couple of those things. We're going to have a theme for this event, Racing Against the Global Quantum Deadline. It's the thing that's sort of driving a lot of what took place here, and it's affecting every sector. So we're going to ask our speakers to focus on this topic. We're going to try and be a little more international. We're inviting more people from the schemes, ANISA, from Asia, and we're going to task them with addressing the theme that I mentioned. We're going to talk about new certification requirements because there are a lot of new schemes. There are private schemes, some that we just discussed here. All of them have cryptographic components to them. We want to take a look at all of them and talk about how they are preparing for this transition post-quantum. And then we're going to have special topics and curated sessions. We're going to task the program committee with putting together 2 or 3 speakers to talk about advanced technologies, AI, SBOM is becoming an issue, cloud, many more. Homomorphic cryptography is one that we hope to address as well. And then something we introduced here, PQ Cyber Day. It's our first day our first time doing a full day addressing enterprise cryptography at the enterprise level rather than hardware and software. And it turned out that 40% of you attended that 4th day. So 40% of the attendees here are focused on this topic as well. So that will continue. So finally, we're going to task all of our speakers to focus on this topic in some form, and we're going to make it a call to action, a global call to action as far as the transition to post-quantum. So the call for speakers is actually open now. So if you want to submit, if you have ideas, get on there. I think our initial deadline is sometime in October, so it is coming up. The other thing I want to mention is that everybody got a survey in your email. You should have gotten it about 20 minutes ago. Fill that out. You'll get access to your video archive and all the presentations. They're being uploaded as we speak. It takes a couple of days, but they will all be there eventually. So thank you all, and thank you for participating in this week.
Let me add to that. I inappropriately missed our own guys. So could you help me thank the 4 panelists? Thank you.